My name is Professor John Edwards, and in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you something about this new document launched in September 2022, Investigation of Moisture and its Effects on Traditional Buildings. It is no exaggeration that this is groundbreaking. An agreement initially between the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, Historic England and the Property Care Association brought about an agreement of how we should all be tackling dampness and moisture in older traditional buildings. And then these other organisations were brought on board. So now there should be consistency, no matter who you are, where you are, or who you work for, or your perspective on this subject. We're going to be doing it the same. I played a very small role in being part of the small 5-person RICS team that made contributions to it, and I also helped to bring the IHBC on board as chair of the IHBC Technical Panel. Of course, many of us, me and many other people, have always been working this way. These are all buildings that I've surveyed and inspected and analysed over a long period of time, and I've taken the same approach. And we all need to understand that this is about working professionally and doing things properly. These are part of doing things in accordance with achieving standards which are set out in other documents, such as BS 7913, the British standard that I led on its development for working on historic and traditional buildings, spells out the right approach to take, but not in the same sort of detail as this document. And when we're looking at these BSI standards on retrofit past 2035, past 2038, again it's about achieving the standards that these documents are meant to achieve. Indeed, you can see on the screen a note taken from past 2035 that references this document. I want to show you briefly what this document covers. And you can see all the different headings here of all the various different chapters, starting with understanding the building, understanding moisture, understanding moisture-related defects, the condition assessment, diagnosis and recommendations, legal requirements, and finally the report. And when you start looking at this document, you know it's not going into actually detail of each and every single aspects of these particular headings, but it spells out the approach that should be taken. Now let's look at what this document covers by looking at each of the sections. And the first section we want to look at is explanatory notes. And as you read this particular page, you will see that again, it's not just about the nitty-gritty of the detail, it's about looking at the principles and competencies. It spells out that this document is for everyone. Whether you are an independent surveyor or whether you're working for a contractor, this is the approach that should be taken by everyone. It is the same. It provides a framework to be undertaken to all different types of buildings, and it also expresses what a traditional building is. As we all know, there may be a number of definitions of what a traditional building is. Very often we say it's a building built before 1919. In BSI documents on retrofit, it's got another specific definition of a traditional building, but use the one that's stated in this document. And it also assumes that if you are deeming yourself to be competent, then you will need to understand laws and guidance that you have to comply with anyway. And it also talks about having to deal with heritage issues and consent issues. And the document has been written on the basis that initially there will be a non-invasive inspection and followed by, if necessary, a more invasive inspection. So let's now look at each section in a little bit more detail. And the first one is understanding the building. And 1A is the context. So it's about understanding the original construction date of a building. And sometimes, as in this example, it may be quite easy. But as we know, most buildings have gone through considerable changes in their lifetime. And when you're looking at the extension to this building, we've got to work out, when was this extension built? What sort of construction is it? Is it the same sort of construction as the original building, or is it a different type of construction? Are the materials the same? And it's not just looking at extensions that are being built, it's other alterations such as replacement of timber floors with concrete and that sort of thing. All of these things need to be understood, and that is essential. So understanding the original construction and the original materials is critically important, and understanding the changes which have taken place, because those changes will change the way the building performs. But we also must understand the setting, and there we are looking at the geography around the building and also where the building is located in respect of weather exposure zones. But also this type of detail, emphasizing buildings will perform in different ways dependent on where they're located and the geography around the building. So when we are assessing a building, we're not just assessing the building itself, we're assessing it in terms of its location and geography. We need to understand that the use of a building will affect its performance, sometimes in a negative way. But if we can work out how the building was used in the past and look at the changes which have taken place in the building, then that can really help us understand that particular issue. And it goes without saying, we must understand the condition of the building. This document also requires us to understand heritage significance. Now, many people may not be familiar with what this is all about, but it's about assessing a building and parts of a building against a criteria which is called heritage values, and then using other criteria to determine the level of significance or heritage significance within a particular building. And once we've mapped all that out, we can actually annotate drawings, plans, elevations in order to highlight those different levels of significance. Now this is doing it in accordance with BS 7913. And later on, I will explain to you in brief detail maybe a simplified method of doing this. We are still on section 1, understanding the building, but this time we're looking at 1B, which is the differences between old and new buildings. Now here today, I'm not going to explain to you every detail about what's in this document, but let me explain some of these things. Probably the most important thing of all, understanding the difference between old and new buildings. So what you can see in front of you is an illustration or illustrations of sections through two different types of buildings, the traditional building on the right hand side and the modern building on the left hand side. Typically, a traditional building will comprise thick, vapor permeable, solid walls, enclosing walls, and also vapor permeable floors. In fact, the building fabric is vapor permeable. So when it rains on the outside, moisture may ingress into the building fabric, and when the rain stops and the sun comes out, most of that moisture will evaporate by the external face. But some of that moisture, and I'm talking about vapor and not liquid, may evaporate internally through the surface of the internal surface of the enclosing masonry walls and also through the floors in a fairly minor and equal way. We're talking about vapor and not liquid. And any moisture that does accumulate within the internal spaces will disperse into the atmosphere through natural ventilation, because we have windows that don't quite fit, open chimney flues and the like. And this is the way traditional buildings have been working for many hundreds, if not more years. And if we compare that with the modern building, largely comprising vapor impermeable building fabric and relying upon vapor barriers, air gaps or cavities in the external building envelope to keep the moisture out, and at least in some spaces relying upon mechanical ventilation to remove moisture that does accumulate, we can see that these buildings are very different. They perform differently. They need to be treated differently. But let's consider this from a moisture perspective. I've already mentioned the traditional building, the building fabric is vapor permeable, which means moisture ingresses into the building fabric and moisture is released from the building fabric. We call that being breathable. I suppose the more technical term would be to say that the materials in traditional buildings will be vapor open, as opposed to the modern building where the building fabric is vapor impermeable. I suppose the right thing to say there would be vapor closed. And these are the essential things that we need to understand. So we've looked at different types of buildings. but we also need to understand how to survey them. And I have always said that older traditional buildings are more difficult to survey and inspect than other buildings because most buildings have had changes undertaken to them during their lifetime. But where modern buildings are concerned, very often the materials that have been brought into the building are compatible with the existing building fabric because the existing building fabric is vapor impermeable. But where traditional buildings are concerned, most of the materials we're bringing into the building will not be compatible with the original building fabric because most of those materials, as a norm, will be vapor impermeable. So we need to be able to understand how we're going to survey such buildings to pick up all those particular issues. And then we see written materials wet and dry. What does this mean? I think I've just explained it when we were looking at the last slide. Performance expectations detailing. These could be very different where traditional buildings are concerned. Sometimes a feature may look good, but a feature is also there to do a job. And when we're looking at the presence of moisture in some elements of traditional buildings, that may be quite normal, wherein if we compare it with a modern building, seeing such high moisture levels may not be normal and may be due to defects. And we also have to look at the way occupancy affects the condition of the building and understanding moisture movement and thermal performance and how they relate together. Everything we've just been looking at, I describe in detail in this one-day course, which explains how to bring this document and its content into practice. It includes work examples and case studies of domestic buildings and non-domestic buildings, and we also compare and contrast with other building types. I'd like to say this is a brand new course, but it isn't. I've been delivering this one-day course for over 10 years. And for the last couple of years, I've been delivering this course based upon the draft version of this document. And now we've refined the course in such a way that it totally brings into practice how we're going to actually put what is detailed into this document into practice. Now we are very briefly going to be looking at the remaining sections, but we haven't got time to go into the detail of all of those. So I'm just giving you a glance of what the content is, and to remind you that if you want to actually download the document itself, you can go to the environmentstudycentre.org website, scroll down on the page showing the course on dampness, and you can download it for free. So when we're going through all these different sections, this document is clearly indicating what you must do in order to comply with it. And as you can see clearly here, it doesn't provide a lot of detail, and therefore it's training that will help you understand how you will put this into practice. I know some of you will be thinking, well, I do this anyway, and a lot of people do, but now it's in black and white how we must all work. The next section is section 3 on understanding moisture-related defects. And as I've said before, in order for you to actually know exactly what this document says, go to the environmentstudycentre.org website where you can download it. Section 4 is on the condition assessment. And section 5 is on diagnosis and recommendations. Section 6 is on legal requirements, and this comes in two parts. 6A, planning and building control, is the first part, and the second part, 6B, is on other legislation, regulations and standards. Then we have section 7, which is a report, and during the one-day course I will show you examples of the way I report on my inspections. And these are some of the buildings that I may include in the one-day course, buildings that I have inspected, analysed and dealt with moisture. So finally, I hope you've enjoyed this short video, which is a snapshot really of what this document is all about. And if you want to know more and find out how you can put it into practice, then you can sign up for this course, a one-day course, look to the Environment Studies Centre website and you'll find out what you need to do. Thank you very much for listening.